What if I were to tell you that the most crucial aspects of your life, your salary, the savings that offer you security, and the money you believe you possess, might not be as real as they seem? What if I claimed that governments and central banks have the power to conjure them out of thin air, devalue them overnight, and still manage to persuade you to trust them like sacred entities? It may sound like a conspiracy theory, but it is far from it. This is the reality of our existence today, and the pivotal moment that reshaped everything has already occurred while most people were oblivious. The date was August 15, 1971. On that Sunday evening, President Richard Nixon made an unexpected appearance on American television, interrupting regular programming with a calm yet decisive demeanor. He announced that the United States would, temporarily, suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. In simpler terms, foreign governments could no longer exchange their dollars for gold, a standard that had long underpinned their value. Centuries later, during the Yuan dynasty in China, another ambitious experiment unfolded: paper currency. Initially celebrated for its convenience and portability over vast distances, this new form of money soon revealed its vulnerabilities. Temptation overwhelmed emperors as they faced a critical question. Why levy taxes on their subjects when they could simply print what they needed? The printing presses worked tirelessly, but with each note produced, public trust began to evaporate rapidly. Merchants grew wary of accepting paper money. Inflation skyrocketed beyond control, and what started as a grand innovation ultimately ended in disaster. Do you see the pattern emerging through these historical episodes? Technologies evolve and eras shift, yet the underlying temptation remains constant. Whenever rulers find themselves capable of dissociating money from tangible value, they seize that opportunity without hesitation. And every single time they do so, society bears the brunt of those actions. This is why President Nixon's decision in 1971 was not an isolated incident but merely another verse in an age-old ballad about economics and governance. The scale at which this occurred was unprecedented compared to previous instances. Rome fell but civilization persisted. The Yuan dynasty crumbled, yet trade continued elsewhere across continents. However, when we speak about the dollar in 1971, we are not discussing just any currency. It represented the backbone of the global financial architecture. Once it severed ties with gold reserves, other nations promptly followed suit. Currencies transitioned into floating rates almost overnight. Central banks began experimenting with monetary policies previously deemed unthinkable, while governments discovered an irresistible allure in unlimited borrowing capabilities. Initially viewed as a successful strategy for stimulating growth by releasing themselves from the constraints imposed by gold standards, this approach seemed promising at first glance. As central banks lowered interest rates and sought innovative ways to invigorate economic activity without traditional limitations in place, many felt optimistic about newfound financial freedoms. Yet history cautions us. This extraordinary liberation often comes hand in hand with unforeseen consequences that can ripple through societies far beyond financial markets alone. In this complex web woven by human ambition and avarice lies both opportunity and peril. Thus we must remain vigilant observers as we navigate these intricate dynamics shaping our world today. Governments have historically operated with a sense of freedom in their spending, buoyed by the knowledge that they could always extend their debts when necessary. Society, in turn, adapted to this reality. The inflation experienced during the tumultuous decade of the 1970s was painful for many, yet by the time the 1980s and 1990s rolled around, things seemed to have settled down considerably. A new economic orthodoxy emerged. Central banks were perceived as skilled engineers capable of fine-tuning the economy much like one would adjust a finely crafted machine. This approach was dubbed monetary policy. This philosophy ushered in decades characterized by credit booms, speculative bubbles, and financial crashes, each one often more severe than the last. However, history reveals an undeniable truth. Such systems are not inherently designed for stability. Instead, they thrive on momentum. Debt must perpetually increase. The money supply needs to keep expanding, and public trust must remain unwavering. Should any of these elements falter or slow down, there is a significant risk of collapse. Much like a shark that must keep swimming to survive, our financial system relies on constant motion. Otherwise, it faces dire consequences. This precarious situation defines our current reality, a world where money has lost all tangible anchors except for faith itself, and where central banks and governments wield the printing press as their ultimate weapon. Since 1971, global debt levels have surged to extraordinary heights that were once unfathomable. For instance, in 1970, the federal debt of the United States stood at approximately $370 billion. Today, this figure exceeds $34 trillion. These numbers are so immense that they can be difficult to comprehend. They resemble attempts to visualize distances across vast cosmic expanses. Yet this entire economic framework hinges on maintaining an unchallenged acceptance of these staggering figures. Consider the financial crises we've endured, from the dot-com bubble at the end of the 1990s to the housing market collapse in 2008 and the pandemic-induced stimulus measures of 2020. Each time, the response has been consistent. Inject more money into the system, increase credit availability, and intensify government intervention. Temporarily, he insisted. Extraordinary, he emphasized. Yet in truth, this decision marked a permanent shift. That night witnessed the severing of ties between currency and tangible reality. Dollars ceased being promises backed by something substantial. Instead, they became mere tokens of faith in government assurances. We are told that these actions represent stability. In reality, they signify acceleration, a relentless drive forward that invariably comes at a cost. The price of this acceleration can be seen starkly reflected in declining purchasing power over time. In 1971, an ounce of gold could be purchased for $35. Today, it commands a price exceeding $2,000 per ounce. In the early 1970s, an average home in the United States was priced around $25,000. Now that figure nears $400,000. While wages have indeed risen since then, they have not kept pace with these soaring costs. For many individuals navigating this era defined by fiat currencies and inflationary pressures, life has become increasingly straightforward yet challenging. Work harder for less savings and ownership while facing escalating expenses. Nevertheless, our economic system insists that we accept this as normalcy, a notion that feels increasingly contrived. This phenomenon is not limited to America alone. Once the dollar severed its ties to gold standard principles, other leading currencies followed suit without hesitation. Europe's Eurozone countries, Japan's yen, and China's yuan all operate without being tethered to any fixed reality or standard. Thus, we observe a broader narrative unfolding globally, one marked by interconnected financial practices devoid of solid grounding in historical fiscal discipline or tangible assets. The implications of these changes resonate far beyond national borders and impact economies worldwide. Every central bank around the globe now finds itself engaged in a similar game, manipulating interest rates, inflating debt, and fervently hoping that public trust remains intact. The harsh reality is that trust persists until it inevitably falters. Historical patterns vividly illustrate this phenomenon. Consider the case of Weimar Germany during the tumultuous 1920s. Burdened by crippling war reparations, the government resorted to printing money in a desperate attempt to alleviate its financial obligations. Initially, this strategy appeared to yield positive results. Factories resumed operations, workers received their wages, and the system seemed to be reviving. However, as time progressed, prices began to double on a weekly basis, and soon enough they were soaring daily. Families found themselves transporting their salaries in wheelbarrows, while children crafted kites from devalued banknotes. Ultimately, when trust crumbled under the weight of hyperinflation, the entire economy collapsed, paving the way for anger, extremism, and the seeds of an even darker era. Now let us turn our attention to Argentina, a nation that has declared sovereign debt default on 9 separate occasions throughout the last century. Each cycle follows a familiar pattern. Overspending leads to inflation, which triggers devaluation and culminates in economic collapse followed by a painful reset. Yet amidst these tumultuous times, ordinary Argentinians have managed to adapt to a reality where saving in national currency is deemed reckless. They stash US dollars under their mattresses or invest in real estate. Increasingly now, some are even turning to cryptocurrency as a safe haven for their wealth. This is what life resembles when money loses its intrinsic value. Nevertheless, an uncomfortable question looms. If history reveals such consistent patterns of economic failure and recovery, Why do we hold the belief that these cycles will not repeat themselves on a global scale? The United States is not immune from such risks. Europe stands vulnerable as well. Even China cannot claim immunity from potential economic upheaval. The financial system we have meticulously cultivated since 1971 is deeply globalized and interconnected, relying entirely on one fragile element, trust. Once that trust erodes beyond repair, there may be no path back to stability. Yet most individuals seldom ponder the simplest question of all: what exactly constitutes money? Many treat it as an inherent aspect of existence, something eternal and indisputable. However, money is not a natural law. Rather, it is a human invention. It comprises a complex web of trust systems, established rules, and coercive measures. In ancient times, forms of currency included shells or salt. Later came silver and gold coins. Eventually evolved paper currency backed by gold reserves emerged. Today, we find ourselves dealing with paper notes unanchored by tangible assets or even digital records maintained within banking systems. Do you notice the trajectory here? Each progression distances us further from tangible reality while plunging deeper into abstraction. With each step away from physical backing comes increased vulnerability to manipulation within this system. To grasp why this momentous event mattered so much, one must rewind to post-World War II. Global leaders came together to create what became known as the Bretton Woods system, where currencies were pegged to the US dollar, with the dollar itself tied to gold at $35 per ounce. This arrangement worked effectively because it fostered worldwide stability. Inflation was kept in check, trade remained predictable, and gold served as a steadfast anchor for economic transactions. This brings us to our current crossroads: digital currency. Governments worldwide are racing to introduce central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. They tout promises of enhanced efficiency, unparalleled convenience, and instantaneous transactions at our fingertips. In this rapidly evolving landscape of finance and economics lies both opportunity and risk, a delicate balance between innovation and stability that society must navigate carefully as we venture into uncharted waters of monetary transformation. However, this also implies complete oversight. Every transaction can be traced, every dollar can be programmed, and the financial existence of every individual comes under the watchful gaze of the government. If currency is already a construct built on trust, imagine what could transpire when the same system has the power to determine with a mere click whether your funds are accessible today or not. A segment of society perceives cryptocurrency as a potential solution. Bitcoin, for instance, emerged in the aftermath of the financial collapse of 2008, branded as digital gold. Its supply is capped, its regulations are dictated by code rather than political agendas. In theory, it offers a safeguard against the relentless inflation that plagues fiat currencies. Nevertheless, it remains volatile and susceptible to speculation, currently falling short of being a comprehensive alternative to traditional money. Perhaps it represents part of the answer, or merely another chapter in an ongoing narrative. The real lesson here transcends discussions about gold, Bitcoin, or even fiat currency itself. The fundamental insight revolves around power dynamics. Each time money is detached from something tangible, those in authority gain greater freedom while others face higher risks. Governments can engage in deficit spending without restraint. Corporations may borrow recklessly. Banks can profit from speculative bubbles, all while ordinary citizens ultimately bear the consequences when these structures collapse. This cycle is evident. This trap is pervasive. It began on that fateful day when currency ceased to hold intrinsic value. So how should we respond armed with this knowledge? First and foremost, we must abandon our pretense. We must cease convincing ourselves that debt is inconsequential or that inflation is merely a transient phenomenon or that governments perpetually act wisely. Instead, we should scrutinize history and identify recurring patterns. Secondly, we need to fortify ourselves against these vulnerabilities, not by chasing after a singular magical asset but by comprehending the system for what it truly is, a mechanism reliant on trust that is destined to fail at some point. Financial literacy acts as our shield. Understanding economic history becomes our weapon. True wealth encompasses more than just monetary assets. It embodies awareness, resilience, and adaptability when illusions begin to crumble around us. History may not repeat itself verbatim, yet it often resonates with familiar themes. Consider the Roman denarius, Chinese paper money, and the banknotes from Germany's Weimar Republic. All serve as stark reminders of an undeniable reality. Once trust erodes, currency loses its life force. When money dies off as a reliable medium of exchange, societal transformations become inevitable and profound. The moment when currency abandoned its tangible essence extends beyond a mere milestone in 1971. It stands as a cautionary tale, an enduring reminder that what appears stable may never actually be so. Ultimately, recognizing these truths equips us with tools to navigate an uncertain financial landscape more effectively. It urges us to remain vigilant and proactive in safeguarding our interests against the inevitable shifts that will arise as trust fluctuates within economic systems worldwide. As we confront these challenges ahead, let us not forget that genuine stability lies not only in financial resources but also in our understanding of how those resources operate within larger societal frameworks. However, by the late 1960s, America found itself in dire straits. The staggering costs associated with the Vietnam War combined with expansive domestic social programs strained fiscal resources severely. As dollars flooded into international markets, America's gold reserves at Fort Knox struggled to keep pace with its monetary output. Consequently, foreign nations began lining up at America's door demanding exchanges of their paper dollars for actual gold coins. The United States soon realized it could not uphold its commitments. If this has opened up a new viewpoint for you, consider the wealth of knowledge that history possesses. I will guide you to uncover where to seek these profound truths. Nixon's proclamation was intended as a temporary fix, but in reality, the opportunity for reinstating gold convertibility never materialized again. By the mid-70s, we entered an entirely new chapter in monetary history, one characterized by currency not backed by gold but rather by government decree itself. Economists refer to this kind of currency as fiat money, a term derived from Latin meaning, "let it be done." In practical terms, this meant that money existed solely because governments declared it so. For the first time in modern history, there were no natural limitations on how much currency could be produced or circulated without corresponding physical assets backing it up. It is remarkable how quietly this seismic shift unfolded within society's consciousness. Many failed to recognize its profound implications until much later. As we navigate through an era defined by this fiat system today, understanding its origins and consequences is vital for recognizing how financial systems operate under rules that can seem arbitrary yet are deeply entrenched in political will and societal trust. The following morning, the streets were remarkably calm. Shops continued to stock their shelves with goods, offering a sense of normalcy to the public. Workers still collected their wages as if nothing had changed, maintaining an illusion that all was well. Yet beneath this surface tranquility lurked a profound shift. Humanity had entered an era where trust, rather than scarcity, underpinned the financial system. History teaches us that when trust becomes the sole anchor of an economy, it is merely a matter of time before cracks begin to appear. This was not the first instance in history where currency became detached from reality. The Romans learned this lesson through hardship and turmoil. Their silver coins, once composed entirely of pure metal, gradually lost their value as emperors desperately sought funds to finance their military campaigns and lavish lifestyles. Emperor Nero, for instance, reduced the silver content of the denarius by nearly one-third. Subsequent rulers continued down this treacherous path until the coins bore little resemblance to silver and were hardly more valuable than bronze with a thin veneer of precious metal. Inflation soared as confidence plummeted, causing citizens to revert to bartering for essential goods. An empire that once prided itself on stability found its economy crumbling due to a fundamental loss of faith in its currency.